You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's ministries. You'll never be the same.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
I know I may sound like a confused person, but last week I spoke about stepping on the gas. Today, I want to say the theme is put your foot on the brake. So we go from stepping on the gas to putting on the brake. And, at the risk of sounding confusing, Jesus, on the one hand, is empowering the disciples to give it their all. He says, all power in heaven and earth have been given to me, and therefore I'm commissioning you. But today, I want to talk about an earlier text from Luke chapter 10, verse 10. And in Luke 10:10, Jesus commissions 72 disciples. Some versions it's 70, others it's 72. But he commissions these additional disciples. And he tells them, go therefore ahead of me into all the villages that I am preparing to minister to. And I want you to prepare the towns for me. And as you go, he says, heal the sick, preach the gospel. He said, but along the way, if there's any town, this is in verse 10, that does not welcome you, he says, shake off the dust from your feet and move on. And what I really want to talk about for the next few minutes is rejection. And I don't know how many people looking at this right now have ever been rejected. I don't know if there's anybody looking at this who can say, there's something I really wanted to do, but I got smacked down. I got beat down. And Jesus is preparing the disciples for rejection. He tells them, when you go into these towns, he said, 1, go 2 by 2. 2, he says, when you go into the towns, don't greet anybody. Now what he meant by that was don't lollygag in the town. He's not saying don't be rude or be rude, but what he's saying is you have a mission, and your mission is to preach the gospel. He says, enter into the homes where you're welcome. And when you're entered into the home of any person in the town, eat what they eat, drink what they drink. In other words, he doesn't want you to play one house over the other. He's saying that if one house is serving steak and the other one is serving hamburger, and you happen just by chance to pick the house with the hamburger, he says, stay right there. And in essence, Jesus is saying, do what the people of the house are doing. And then he says, but if anybody does not welcome you, he says, shake off the dust and move on. In the more modern day traditions, like the New Revised Standard Version, it says, it doesn't say shake off the dust, but what it says is when you get ready to leave the house, say, walk out into the streets and shout, even the dust of this city we shake off and we leave. And so what I want to talk about for a few minutes right now is rejection. I don't know if there's anybody looking at this right now who's ever been rejected. Rejected in love. Felt rejected by your mother, your father. Maybe you felt rejected in school. But there's rejection in life. I had a 7th grade math teacher who couldn't figure out how to explain how to do algebraic equations for me. And in his frustration, he hovered over me one day and he looked down at me and he said, "What's the matter? Are you dumb? Are you stupid?" It's the most humiliating experience I've ever had in my life. My little friends in class were snickering. The teacher was hovering over me, and I felt like I was in hell. I said, my mother and my father taught me, always respect the teacher. I said, but this guy is disrespecting me, but I can't say it because my mother and my father told me, don't talk back to the teacher. I was so embarrassed, I didn't tell my mother and my father until much, much later in life. I was a grown man when I told them what I endured. And the point that I'm making is I felt like the teacher had rejected me. I don't know if anybody here has ever felt rejected by a teacher. And that teacher could not figure out how to explain the algebraic formulas to me. And I tell you, I struggled with the algebraic formulas in high school and then in college. And I just prayed to the Lord that I would survive it. But the point that Jesus is saying is when you are rejected, he says at some point you've got to cut it loose. When Saul is made the first king of Israel and Samuel the prophet grieves over Saul because Saul does not turn out the way he envisioned that he would. Finally, the word of the Lord comes to Samuel the prophet and says, how long will you grieve over Saul? And at that point, God tells Samuel, you've got to anoint a new king. And that's the point when David is anointed. But in life, there are moments of rejection. And I know there's got to be somebody looking at this right now who's saying, you know, I felt rejected in love. I felt rejected at work. I felt rejected in my politics. And what the Lord is really saying to the disciples in Luke 10 is that when you get to the point of rejection, at some point, you just have to move on. You've got to move on. You've got to put on the brakes on the one hand, but then you got to step on the gas on the other hand. And, you know, there are many, many points that we can make from this. And one of the main points is that we have to be confident enough in ourselves. We have to be confident enough in what the Lord has called us to do, to know when it's time to shift gears and move on. As a pastor of a church, I've had many times throughout my ministry where sometimes people are not supportive. And it grieves me if a person is not supportive. Because at that point, I hear the voice of God talking to Samuel, which says, how long will you grieve? How long will you grieve for this person? And you want to pull everybody together, but at some point, you just have to move on. And that is a hard lesson for us to learn. But at some point, we just have to draw the line and say, it's time for me to try a new career. As much as I love marriage, and I'm in my 47th year of marriage. I'm very pleased with my marriage, but I have seen people over the years, and I've talked to people over the years who told me marriage is just not working out. And it's not working out for any number of reasons. And because it's not working out, at some point, you just have to put the brakes on it. You have to when you have tried your best, when you've prayed your hardest, when you have done everything that you possibly could have done, and it still does not work, and you are grieving because you took a vow for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do us part. But at some point, sometimes, it just was not meant to be. And at that point, you have to draw a line in the sand, pray to the Lord, and ask the Lord to help you to move on. In my life, I talk to the Lord every day. And I talk to the Lord every day, and I ask the Lord simple questions. One of them is, when is it time to step on the gas? And when is it time to put on the brakes? And I pray for wisdom. I pray for insight. I pray for understanding. And I pray that when the shadows lengthen, the evening comes, the busy fever of life is hushed. When my time in this world is done, and the pearly gates begin to swing wide open, I want the Lord to reach out a hand to me and say, Nick, you tried your best. Nick, you preached the gospel. Nick, you tried to pray for the sick. You tried to visit people in prison. Now it's time to lay down. It's time to move on and to transition into life eternal, because you've done all you could. You stepped on the gas when it was time to move forward. But you also put on the brakes when it was time to say, I cannot go any farther. And so enter now into the joy of thy salvation. My friends, I thank you so much for being with me today. And remember, I am praying for you. Stick around, because I'm going to be talking with Dr. Ural Hill, a psychologist, about this whole concept of when to move forward and when to stop. God bless, and we'll be right back.
We hope you have enjoyed the first portion of today's broadcast. This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's Ministries. You'll never be the same.
Hello, this is Pastor Nick Hood. Thanks for being with us through this part of the show. I began talking about a little earlier putting your foot on the brake as a contrast to last week, which was stepping on the gas. But Dr. Ural Hill is with us today, and Dr. Hill, thanks again for being here. I'm humbled that you would take time out of your schedule to be a part of this little ministry. And what do you think about that concept that I mentioned of there's got to be a time when you know when to shake off the dust and put your foot on the brakes?
Well, first, you're humbled. I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Pastor Hood. I love that scripture. And psychologically, it's one of the, as you said in your sermon, as you shared, the greatest challenges we have in life is moving on. You know, there's a psychological continuum, an accepted continuum to the grieving process. Grieving isn't just leaving the loss of a loved one to the afterlife. We grieve, you know, it's in grievance in the contracts when we feel we've been taken advantage of in the workplace. We grieve it through the stewards in the union. Psychologically, we have what we call cognitive restructuring and cognitive reframing that we need to do. The brain protects itself and us by holding on to negative memories, defeats, traumas, more strongly than they hold on to positive memories, because the brain is protecting us from being harmed again. Whether that's in love, whether that's a student in the classroom who's been told you'll never make it, whatever it is, we'll hold on to that negative memory. It's like touching the stove and burning your hand. You remember, well, I don't want to touch that stove anymore. If someone gets a broken heart, some will go into depression, like they will overgeneralize all women to that one bad relationship, or all men. The point is, and this is what the majority of my clients come to me for, they come because they have some unfinished business. There's been something that hurt them or traumatized them, and they're stuck. They have sometimes intrusive thoughts, and they can't get out of that rotation. And we've got to help them to cognitively restructure how they processed that negative event and the negative self-talk that's repeating itself to them, that stops them from reaching their full potential and moving on. So Jesus, the wonderful counselor, is really giving advice, omnipotent, omniscient advice to how to move on. He's empowering people by saying, shake the dust off your feet. He's saying, I got your back. He says, shake the dust off your feet and move on. If they don't accept you, and then they don't accept me or my Father who sent me. We love you. We have you covered. Shake the dust off your feet as a testament against them. And he goes on to say, and it will be worse for them than Sodom and Gomorrah.
That's right.
He does.
Right.
So he's taking the bully, and he's taking the one who's been the victim and turning them into the hero and empowered. He says, when you shake that dust off your feet, if you've been righteous and you've preached the gospel and you've been humble, and if they throw you out or they treat you and they harm you, treat you negatively, he said, when you are mine, you're a child of the King. And when you shake that dust off your feet and you move on, it's going to be bad for them. But open your mind up to all that we have for you. Go to the next city. Go to the next town. And it also speaks to forgiveness and unforgiveness. There's a saying, living in unforgiveness is like drinking the poison and hoping the other person dies. Drinking the poison, hoping the other person dies. If we're not able to shake that dust off our feet, we're harming ourselves more than we're harming the other person that we feel harmed us. So we need to shake that dust of unforgiveness off our feet as well as we move. And that's where the brakes come on. Put on the brakes for any negative self-talk we have about ourselves. And I have more, but that's the gist. That was the first thing that jumped out at me.
Well, Dr. Hill, I believe there's probably somebody looking at this right now who's saying, I've got some unfinished business.
Okay.
There's something, I've one track that I'm on, but maybe it's time for me to do something else. Could you just give us maybe 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 things that a person can do in their own mind to shift gears
Sure.
to get on a more positive track?
Sure. We have what we call rational behavioral therapy, and I know that was of God because there are 5 ways to think rationally about a decision and when you're moving on. And if you have a pen, write this down. You want to ask yourself 5 questions so that you can be confident on shaking the dust off, putting on the brakes, and moving on.
Okay, what's number 1?
Number 1, you ask yourself, 1, is what I'm doing and contemplating doing based on objective facts?
Okay.
It's not a rumor. I've done my research. Is it based on objective facts? Number 2,
Number 2.
is what I'm about to do when I decide to move on, is it going to keep me from hurt, harm, and danger? All right. Number 3, is doing what I'm doing going to keep me from conflict with people who are important to me? All right. Number 4, is doing what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, going to help me reach my short and long-term objectives? Where am I trying to go? And number 5, is doing what I'm about to do or what I'm thinking going to help me feel the way I want to feel? Now, if they get 3 yeses out of those 5 questions for rational decision making, it's a go. Shake the dust off and get out of town.
Now, with number 5, is what I'm going to do going to help me to feel the way that I want to feel?
That's right.
Now, suppose it's an axe murderer or a person who's contemplating a mass shooting. I mean,
Right.
how do we
They got
make sure that the way they want to feel is socially acceptable
Right.
and acceptable to the Lord?
Right. Well, one, they need at least 3 yeses.
Okay.
So it's not just I feel the way I want to feel. Is it based on objective facts? Now, this is for people who are high functioning, normal brain folks. I mean, if you're an axe murderer and you don't have a normally functioning brain, you need more help than I can give you on this show. You might need to be, rehabilitated in a 24-hour facility, or maybe one of those facilities that we call a jail. So some people need to go to jail. I learned that as well. But the point is, this rational thinking is for those who want to move forward. As far as the morality of it, and you start talking about the morality of right and wrong and good and bad, well, ultimately, the model of mental health is based on 2 primary things. Doing good, we call that beneficence, and then non-maleficence, not doing bad. So I hope that that's answering your question.
Yeah, it does. And I want to go back to one of the points you just mentioned about, maybe a person needs to check in to a 24-hour facility. Over the years, I've helped people to check in.
Right.
What are some of the warning signs that internally, that somebody looking at this program right now, that maybe they're not feeling good?
Right.
When is the tipping point when a person should consider checking in to a mental health facility?
Right. Okay, I'm glad you asked. I do a lot of psychological evaluations for the court system. Mental state at the time of a particular crime, readiness to stand, competency to stand trial, and the like. There are some documents, some short assessments in the public domain. The Beck's Depression Inventory. You can Google Beck, B-E-C-K, ', Depression Inventory. In 15 minutes, it can tell you your level of depression from normal ups and downs to severe depression. Beck's Anxiety Inventory. It can tell you your level of anxiety, all right? The Holmes Ra, in 15 minutes on a normal, scale. And then the Holmes Ra Stress Inventory can tell you within 20 minutes whether or not you are close to having a stress-induced health disorder based on what's going on in your life. There's the Michigan Substance Abuse Test, the MAST, and the DOST. In 15 minutes, we can tell if you have an addiction, pretty much, in general, just from something that's in the public domain. The signs and symptoms And I'm glad you make the delineation. There's abnormal psychology and there's normal mental health counseling. There's counseling, there's clinical psychotherapy, there are social workers. All of us work in this continuum. We have a book called the DSM-5, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders 5. It determines what's normal and what's abnormal. If I am feeling out of sorts, get one of those regular documents, check it out. One of those documents that you can get online, check it out. If you find yourself on the higher end of that continuum, seek professional help if you're severely depressed. Ultimately, many people think if I go to see a mental health therapist or a counselor or a psychologist, there must be something wrong with me. Well, in that, most of who we deal with are high-functioning people who go to work every day and are doing well. Pastors, judges, police officers, physicians, preachers, teachers, everybody come, and it's a blessing to have a therapist to deal with just relational things and normal problems like when to move on. But then there are those who are on that edge, and most of them are going to deal with somebody who's going to operate in that continuum, and a lot of times it's inside a mental health facility. Now, as far as checking into a mental health facility, I wouldn't recommend just walking in and checking yourself in. I would get a professional to do a professional assessment if it goes beyond.
Well, Dr. Hill, you've been great in outlining that. I'm sure what you have just said is very helpful for somebody who's looking at this program today. We're about out of time.
Okay.
But for those of you who are looking at this, remember, there's a time to step on the gas and there's a time to put on the brake. And sometimes you just have to shake off the dust and move on.
That's right.
So thank you again for being with me.
Oh,
and
you're welcome,
next
Pastor
week,
Hood.
Dr. Hill, I'm going to be talking about a friend at midnight.
Okay.
And to talk about friendship. And I'm so glad you're going to be with me. And I want to pick your brain about who is the friend at midnight.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Again, this is Pastor Nick Hood. Thank you so much for being with us today. And next week, we'll be talking about Jesus and the friend at midnight. This is from Luke chapter 11. God bless, God keep you. And remember, I'm praying for you.
Thank you for watching today's program. We hope you've been blessed in a powerful way. Just knowing you took the time to watch today's broadcast is a great encouragement to Pastor Nick Hood. If this broadcast has been a blessing to you, we ask that you mail a tax-free donation to Nicholas Hood Ministries at 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.